Indepth Arts and Care Podcast, where creativity meets compassion, is a captivating podcast that invites listeners on a journey of exploration where the transformative power of art and the art of caring collide. Delving into the lives of remarkable individuals, this show uncovers the profound ways in which creativity, empathy, and compassion intersect, reshaping our perspectives on the human experience.
I'm Brian Wiggins. I'm the gallery director at Cedar Crest College's Center for Visual Research. I think I became aware of Anthony's work probably 6 years ago, 5 years ago, something like that. Then I, just started talking to him. I think I probably saw him at the banana factory. It really probably began then. The current show that you're looking at, I think it's easily been 2 years of conversation and watching the work develop more fully. Generally, the structure of the gallery is, it's art that's based in the pictorial or the abstract. Very rarely does it encompass three-dimensional elements of painting as a key component of it, and then to be able to take it off the wall and present it in the space as if it is literally three-dimensional sculpture is very unique. The easiest way to get in touch with the gallery is through Instagram, Center for Visual Research, and just send a message and you'll hear back from me. I just want to add that when I moved to New York in 2001, I had $400.
Hello and welcome to the Indepth Arts and Care Podcast. I'm your host, Michael B. Judkins. I'm so happy to be here with you today. This episode is sponsored by OC14 Entertainment, L.L.C. It is creating stories that reach, teach, and inspire. I'm here at the beautiful art gallery at Cedar Crest College in Allentown, Pennsylvania. And I have a very special guest that is here with us this afternoon on this podcast, Mr. Anthony Smith, who is a professor of visual artist. Well, I would say a brilliant visual artist and a man of creativity. So let me welcome you to Mr. Anthony Smith and Mr. Anthony Smith to the Indepth Arts and Care Podcast. How are you, sir?
I'm doing well. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. So one of the things that I know about art is the appreciation of art and what I like for color. So please tell us a little bit about yourself and how did you get into art?
Well, that's a little bit of a winding story, but I think that initially it was kind of like a moment of crisis when I was in undergrad, so deciding what I was going to do for my future. I was on a different kind of track. I thought I was going to be a lawyer or work in politics in some fashion.
Interesting.
I was a double major in political science and fine arts when I was in undergrad. And so in my senior year, I applied to a bunch of schools in fine arts and political science, and I said, whoever gives me the best financial package, I'll do that. Because I was like such an academic machine that all I knew about was school. And so I just wanted more time. And so I was like, okay, wherever I get the best financial package, I'll go there, and then give me more time to figure it out. And so I got into a good school for fine arts, and I went there and figured out myself a little bit more and decided to, kind of go career as a fine artist. But I had always been interested in art. I always been a thing that I did in my spare time, and sometimes as coursework or an elective work. But it wasn't until I got to Michigan, where I went to grad school, that I started thinking, okay, I need to take it seriously and be an adult. And how do you do this? And how do you make money at it? And what is my aesthetic? And where's my agenda? So that's when I started taking it seriously. So,
yep. So you said your career and money, and turning from one aspect into making it pretty much a career for you. Mm-hmm. What does that actually look like as an artist, as a visual artist?
It looks like many years of poverty. Lots of struggle. I mean, I think that in America, we don't really support arts the way I think we should. And so it involves learning how to hustle. I think that artists are the innovators of hustle culture. So it means wearing many hats, running around. When I left graduate school, I moved from Michigan to New York, and I likened it to what Madonna did, because he did something very similar. Yeah. She went to Michigan as well. And then like she went to New York in the 80s. In the 80s
She
with
used
nothing
to
in
be
her
at the
pocket.
downtown clubs.
Yep, and I did something very similar. I had a Subaru Royale station wagon and $300, and I went to New York with nothing.
That was it?
That's it. That's all I had.
Wow.
Yeah, back in 2002. So right after the terrorist act, like in that winter after the terrorist attack, and actually 9/11 inspired me to go to New York because I said, now's the time because everyone's leaving and rents are cheap. So let me get out of like Michigan.
That's a very good kind of transition for yourself. I like that.
Yep. And so I landed in West New York first, which is right across the Hudson in New Jersey, and slept on the floor of a friend's place that I went to undergrad with. And then after she kicked me out because I was loitering too long, I ended up in Williamsburg, far east Williamsburg, close to. It was actually like, it was on the edge of like that neighborhood. And I was in the 5th floor walk up of this apartment where my roommate at the time didn't tell me that the rent that I was paying was actually the rent for the entire house. And he was pocketing, he was like basically living rent free because I was paying the rent for that place.
Oh, so that was never really discussed?
No, it wasn't discussed. I mean, I call it my first New York life tax.
I like that.
And so I had a couple
you got the real side of New York. Original hustle game. So once I found that out, the boyfriend that I was dating at the time rescued me and said like, come and live with me, even though we had only been dating for like 6 months at a time. So we kind of rushed ahead in our relationship. That's okay.
So he got me out of that situation. I ended up living in Inwood for many years, and I loved it. And that's why I kind of like started to learn a little bit more of that hustle game, like, doing after school teaching, little arts projects here and there, putting together shows with me and my other friends that I had from undergrad and friends that I met in New York. And we kind of curated ourselves in shows, and we discovered that like many spaces like this one at schools, universities, they had defunded their programs, so they didn't really have exhibition directors. And so, I would like investigate these spaces, and I would put in proposals, knowing that they didn't have any kind of like, curation. If you just put a proposal, they'll let you have a show. And that's how me and some of my friends would like, get exposure, because we weren't getting into any of the galleries. So we found that loophole, and we would curate ourselves into shows, like, 4 or 5, 6-person shows across the country. And that's how I like actually started to build my CV up, over the years.
Well, that's a wonderful. I like the fact that you said at the time with your boyfriend rescued you from that period of time, right?
Yep.
Because I think it correlates into artistry at times to where it goes back to a further point that you mentioned earlier, the struggles of a creative, right? And then sometimes using your natural resources can actually help support you in that sense.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that you just sound like you had a really good support system there, and friends to brilliantly put this together to do an art show. That's
not
amazing.
only that. I mean, this is what I tell undergrads all the time. Like, you have to build your networks, and your friends and colleagues who are around you are going to be your support system in the future. Like, one of my good friends when I first moved to New York was my friend Loretta Staples, and she would feed me. I mean, she lived in the village, and there was this place called McSorley's. I don't know if you know that place.
I'm very familiar with the village. I was part of the village when Keller's and Two Potato.
Yeah,
so I'm that 90s village, 2000 village in New York City. So I'm very familiar with that part of New York City, especially during those years. It was nothing but, I would say that's the time in the village, and if New York is, whether it's the East Village or the West Village, it was very popular.
Well, yep. I mean, like, Sex and the City was like, all the rage. And
West 4th Park down near the basketball court. Exactly. Nels.
So Loretta lived on Charles Street, and so McSorley's is up on the block, maybe a couple of blocks away on 13th, right around the corner from that gallery was like a white cube or white, I forget the name of it, but so she would feed me, you know, because I was broke all the time. I do remember one time she was friends with Bell Hooks, and Bell Hooks was like in her apartment once giving me relationship advice because she didn't like my boyfriend at the time. And so I thought that was really funny. But yeah, I mean, like, you know, she and Bradley, actually, my ex, saved me. Yeah. And especially that first year that I was in New York, you know, and without them, I don't think I could have survived. So I always tell people, like, you know, definitely take care of your friends and, like, you know, be kind to them, because you don't know when they're going to be useful to you in a sort of existential sense.
I agree with you. One of the things that I put in emails or even talk to people is always tell them about be kind. Just understand that word of kindness and what that word can do for people in general, just that word. Yeah. Right. So we are sitting right in front of such a beautiful piece of your artwork. And my understanding with art, I work alongside a lot of great visual artists. My understanding, I'm a very abstract looker when I look for artwork or even purchase artwork, right? And you got the contemporary versus the modern. How do you fit style or the styles of art? I guess subgenres or genres of art. Where do you fit in that equation?
Oh, wow. That's a good question. I don't really think that I fit in sort of a well-defined vein of art. I mean, I would say it's definitely, you know, somewhat abstract, but there are representational bits in it. Of course, you see figures in it so much. I say that what I do is tell stories, and so I call what I do abstract narrative painting. It definitely, you know, harkens back to a certain sort of assemblage tradition. Some people disparage it as decoupage. But like, I think that it's much more about, you know, complex storytelling. I don't know what particular movement, like, you know, I guess, you know, I come out of the remnants of that postmodern tradition, but from a disciplinary perspective. You know, when I came out of school, we were still dividing things in specific genres or specific disciplines of painting and printmaking and sculpture. Now all those genres feel kind of like passé. So whenever I hear them like sort of talked about, I kind of wonder, like, you know, why you speaking of the past, you know, no contemporary artist who's a professional would like limit themselves by saying I'm just a painter, or, you know, everyone is doing everything all the time, and that's kind of like what our world is about. And so I feel like I come out of that, like, you know, the vestiges of like that postmodern tradition. I don't know what ism we're in now, but I do know that, like, you know, we're definitely not in postmodernism anymore. I think that, like, you know, has been moved past that. So okay. I think that, like, you know, I'm trying to figure out ways of describing the world and the sort of mixtures that I see all the time for what it is. And so that's why I sort of employ a super dense fashion, because I feel like that's what the world is. It's true to the world. I like to paint without filters, I like to create without filters. And I feel like sometimes people are afraid of the complex. And I think that I want to show people that they can see something complex and dense, and see a certain type of harmony in it, because it is a real reflection of the world. You know, it's not a reduction to be complex. It's actually an acceptance of the grand. You know, it's like the feeling. It's like the feeling of being at the ocean and, like, you know, being at peace with, like, the fact that it's bigger than you. You know.
That your vision doesn't just extend to what you see beyond your eye, in front of you,
or what you can understand with an instant glance. Yeah, because everything about our world today is about, like, instant discernment. You know, media, the corporations want simplicity because it helps with marketing.
That's right.
And with purchasing, it's all part of a capitalist construction. And so, like, you know, our tastes are, you know, sort of filtered in that way as well. And so I think that like what I like to showcase in my work is that like, there's other ways of thinking. You don't have to like, you don't have the shield of capitalism with your aesthetic appreciation.
Well, I like that. And I want to piggyback to something that you said, because I want you to expand on that. Just having an experience of your exhibition here at Cedar Crest College in Allentown. You said abstract narrative with storytelling. Which one of your pieces that you would say, or the period of time when you did that piece, that's a remnant of you in your life in storytelling?
Every piece in here is a self-portrait.
Wonderful.
I had to tell you, they're actually very tragic, because in every piece I can see a part of a piece of my past that's very painful. The work in here is all about tropes, negative Black tropes, and I see either myself or people in my family through those tropes, and so trudging through some of this sometimes really quite racist material and trying to reinterpret it is an exercise of going through my past and reliving trauma and trying to understand it and then reinterpret it in a way that I think a person can sort of access, which is for me through humor, because I think that that's the easiest way that people can enter at least my artwork is through humor. So it's like a transmutation of my experiences and my experiences with this ephemera, to land in a humorous space that hopefully a viewer can dive into from that place, and then maybe go on that journey themselves.
Wonderful. I love that response, and I would say that response, for me at least, from one artist to another artist, I found that to be so inspirational, right? Because sometimes our art is just that, right? It is a reflection of our day-to-day life. It's a reflection of our past. It's a reflection of our present. It's a reflection of our predicted futures sometimes. And as artists, every artist I came in contact with, there is some form of trauma. Or there is some form of recognition of what trauma is. Yeah. And understanding the wellness of that one person has to do with mental health. So how do you, as a visual artist and just being a professor and all the wonderful things you do, how do you take care of yourself as far as doing any type of self-care?
Well, I do have, I do therapy, not as regularly as I should. I often miss meetings, but when I feel like I need it, I do have a therapist. I chime in with a group of close friends. I think that creating in the studio is a certain type of self-care.
Absolutely.
I try to stay in my studio pretty monastic. I use that term a lot with my art practice. I'm in the studio for 20, 30, 40 hours a week. Not always doing work, of course. Sometimes just looking, thinking, listening to good music. Watching programs on YouTube. I'm sort of obsessed with certain YouTube channels, often dealing with politics or culture. Okay. Kind of the state of the world, those kinds of, and architecture. I love architecture YouTube videos. And so doing that kind of stuff, just sort of processing all the stuff that we're encountering. And then doing the work, figuring out how to shift something that I'm working on. With these pieces in particular, they all have pretty rigid rules that go into them. I'm a very rules-based painter. I set up the rules so I can break them. And so doing all that plotting in my studio, I'm thinking about how to push what I'm doing in different directions and how to sort of address a lot of fear that I have about going outside of a genre, for example, which is what this show is about. Because I started this journey 2 years ago with that piece over there in the corner, really kind of investigating different kinds of sizes of work. And I noticed over the years I had a tendency to want to push the work off the wall. I always dense 2-inch cradles on paintings because it kind of like had that like stand off the wall. But then I started like, becoming obsessed with like, just pushing edges. I put a lot of information on the edge to help the viewer kind of expand their perception of my work. And then I thought that the edge was the problem. So I started like playing with that. And then I started like, growing out from the wall altogether. And as you see over the life of the series, the pieces became much more sculptural. And I had a lot of fear about that because, again, I was very genre driven, disciplinary driven in school. The tradition that I came out of was very much like painters paint, sculptors sculpt, printmakers printmake, and like to jump out of your genre to go into someone else's was kind of like a threat, to them. There were gatekeepers who didn't like you to step on their toes, they want you to stay in your lane.
Wonderful. Yeah, so I wanted to ask, who are the people, or what inspires you to keep going? Because on top of all the wonderful things that you are, and who are you becoming to be, and who you're walking into as your path, I also hear a lot of innovative things that you're doing. So what is inspiring you to keep going?
I think the will to live sometimes. there are lots of I have a lot of like artistic inspirations, both local and like, regional and national. So Beresford Booth, who's a local painter, is a great inspiration of mine because of his deep intelligence and philosophy, and his journey. So I think that he's like definitely a testament of overcoming adversity. Obviously, you know him. There are like when I was first coming up, I thought that I was going to be like, there was this painter, his name is Terry Winters, and I wanted to be Terry Winters. Like I wanted to be the Black Terry Winters. Building these sort of like galactic, huge, like very, very dense paintings, or Anselm Kiefer. He's another one that is one of my great heroes. These kind of like heroic lions of like the field with egos that match their expansive canvases. And so I wanted to be one of those great painters, and so that was like my ambition when I was like younger, and I guess I still have a little bit of that in me. I would love to be in the Whitney or the MoMA. It's like a secret aspiration.
That's right. Put it in the universe.
Well, yeah. I had a run-in with I went to a book signing with who's this? I'm trying to remember his name. It's like on the tip of my tongue. David Sedaris. After he wrote his book "Me Talk Pretty" one day. And if you know Sedaris, he went to SAIC, School of the Art Institute of Chicago, as a performance artist way back in the day. And I was at a book signing of his in Kalamazoo, Michigan, and this is right out of graduate school. And he said, and I said to him, putting my book in the sand that he was going to sign, what advice do you have to a graduate? From our college, knowing that he never finished, because he went off and did his own thing. And he wrote in my book, "Choose another career."
Oh wow! That was really bold.
Yeah, but then he said something.
Honest.
But then he said something afterwards that was like a great inspiration. He said, "When you're on the cover of Artform, find me and show me this book." For saying that, and that gave me inspiration.
Did you go back?
Well, I haven't been on the cover of Artform yet, but I'm on that journey. You know what I mean? Because I felt like it was a challenge. It's like he threw it on the gauntlet. He was like, "Okay, now I'm giving you some I'm pouring cold water on your vision, but I'm saying, if you want it, come back and find me."
And I love that. And the first thing that came to mind when you said that, it was not doubt from him, was more in the sense of that you can use that energy to push you forward.
Well,
right?
yeah.
But at the same token,
but he was being real.
I was about to say, at the same token, as an artist, we deal with that.
Well, and I think that sometimes, this is what happened to me. I thought that there was a job out there called artist, and all I had to do is apply, and I can be there for the rest of my life. And I think that one of the things that we as academics don't do enough of is, sort of pour cold water or give a hard dose of reality to our undergrads to take them out of their fanciful, notions. I guess you have to really given that advice, be, careful and sensitive and with certain populations, it's the reality of what they'll face is going to be different than others. I would definitely tell a person of color without resources or family background to back them that the art world is not necessarily for you if you don't have strong entrepreneurial instincts.
That's a good lesson to learn, that getting those business courses and looking up business and ethics and everything else helps.
And personally, I think it's irresponsible. I always often think about, especially in graduate schools, it's irresponsible to set up a graduate program without that, at its core. Yeah. Every burgeoning artist should have an understanding of how to build a business plan. And when I went to school, that was sort of forbidden in school. We don't talk about the practical in school. We only give you space to create. And I think it was, it's a disservice to the students to do that. I guess that they had a version of that. I do remember one course in graduate school where the professor, who was an asshole, I hated this guy, but he did say, I won't tell you his name, but he did say there are 250,000 students, 250,000 M.F.As in America, and that was back in 2001. Probably more than that now. And so that was his way of saying, what shot do you think you have if there are 250,000 people with your degree out there right now? And so, I thought that that was useful knowledge, but he didn't give you the other piece, which is how do you build a business plan?
Right.
How do you go out there and build clients? How do you talk to a curator?
Right.
How do you build a collection of work? How do you photograph your work? Even those kind of practicals and basics, we didn't teach our students, and it's barely addressed today in schools. I think there's some tacit construction of those kinds of programs, because I think that students are demanding more practicums to legitimate these high fees that schools are demanding of them, and also some career development too. Sort of useful. I don't know. What am I trying to say? Some useful placement after you graduate. So you can get your career started. So I think that some of these things are starting to happen, but it's it should have been thought of a generation ago. So you wouldn't have 250,000 people out there who are not using their degrees.
That's a good point. You made a really great point and a great insight to just think about, right? So I actually have us sitting behind one of your pieces. Explain to our audience, what is this piece we're standing behind while sitting in front of?
This is, I call this is part of a series of work that I call August. And it's an idea that I had a few years ago about just what that month means to me. Because when I think about August, is sort of just pregnant. It's just full heat, abundance,
it's
density.
Indepth, arts and care.
It's density. It's I feel like August is all in a month, the encapsulation of my art style. And so I wanted to create a series of work.
I got to give you a 5 for that one there. I love that.
Yeah.
I love that concept.
Yeah.
Wow.
And so I thought, okay, let me make a series of paintings or pieces about that month. And it kind of grew. It was several different things iterations before, but then I kind of settled on this idea of making these paper quilts. And I had a great opportunity to go to Senegal 2 years ago. And while I was there, I really fell in love with their tradition of patchwork quilt making. This is after we were told when we went to the National Museum of African American. I don't know exactly the name of that museum, but the big museum down in DC. That quilt making was an American tradition, and that there was nothing like it in Africa. And then I went to Senegal and I saw quilt making in Africa. So I was like, well, why aren't you talking to those people over there? But I fell in love with this patchwork quilt making, and the way that these women and these villages made their works was super collaborative and made without ego, which I thought was great. And it goes against like, sort of our heroic, single artist tradition in America. They would make all these patches and throw them in a pile, and they would assemble bunches of different patches and put together these forms. And I fell in love with that tradition. I was like, that is like the way to work. And so I came back and wanted to, incorporate that idea into this August idea. And so I made this piece inspired by that. And this is the second of the series. The first one was based on my experience in Scotland, and I went to Scotland in that same year. So I had these two different sort of traditions of quilt making in my mind. I had what was happening in Scotland in my mind, and that's a very, very different tradition. And then I had Senegal in my mind. So the first piece was called August Sanker, because I was in a town called Sanker in Scotland, and this piece is called August Dakar, because it's about my time in Dakar. And so it kind of reflects the images and the atmosphere that I saw. I met a great artist there. His name is Kadir, with a last name I can never pronounce, but Kadir taught me basically how he makes work in that city, and how he's also an educator. He works with kids there. And he basically uses the city as his palette, and he's just like those women that in those villages. He picks pieces, collage bits and pieces. Cardboard, cardboard is like one of his primary materials, and he uses that to build these assemblage pieces with his students. So he never has that problem that we have in America about finding materials and using the right material, because the city is his art store.
Wonderful.
And I just love that idea. And so I kind of used all those influences to build this work, trying to keep those ideas fresh, and also the colors to build these pieces. And it's basically, I tell people these are sort of, not that I think of my work as garbage, but I call them almost like garbage pieces. It's made of scraps for my studio, because I'm trying to use my studio as an art store, everything that I see in it, bits of paper that you might throw out. It's and it's made like a quilt. It's sandwiched. It's it's layered, so there's an outside layer, and there's material, ephemera in the middle, and then there's another sandwich layer on top, so that actually moves like a quilt. That's why I call them paper quilts.
Wonderful. Well,
and I was also inspired by the G-Ben quilt makers from our own tradition in America, down in Alabama, Southern quilt makers. So you see motifs that I saw from several of those women as layers on top. And it's kind of hard to see, but some of the constructions of certain blocks are directly tie-ins to that tradition there.
Wonderful.
So yeah.
Thank you for that.
Yeah.
So where can we find your work?
You can find me at abstractnarrativepainting.com, and also on Instagram, where I try to post regularly, and that handle is A. Smith Jr. NYC.
Wonderful, wonderful. Again, our audience here at the Indepth Arts and Care podcast appreciate you for being on. This was such a bright and just educational for me interview, and I love your work and I love your pieces, and we'll show some of Anthony pieces and all his contact information to reach out to him. Will be on the episode's description list, for that way my audience could reach out to you. Anthony, it's been a pleasure.
Thank you. I really appreciate it.
So thank you guys for tuning in to the Indepth Arts and Care podcast. I'm your host, Michael B. Judkins. And again, remember, your dreams are yours. Be kind to yourself.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this episode and you'd like to support the podcast, share the podcast on social media, or guest on the podcast or review. Follow us at Indepth Arts and Care on streaming platforms.